POWERcast, a podcast by the John Glenn College of Public Affairs at The Ohio State University. My name is Dr. Tina Pierce, and I will be your host today. The Leadership Forum podcast offers leadership tips and inspiration for public service professionals. POWERcast episodes highlight women leaders in public and nonprofit organizations and their stories of overcoming challenges unique to women in politics and public service. Today, I'm honored to be joined by Elizabeth Edwards, founder and managing partner of H Ventures Partners. Welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
There is an enormous gender gap in venture capital funding in the United States. In 2017, Harvard Business Review found that female entrepreneurs receive only about 2% of all venture funding, despite owning 38% of the businesses in the country. In 2018, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor reported that male founders raised $109 billion in VC funding in comparison to female funders' $2.86 billion in the US. The lack of investment in women-funded startups is a missing opportunity. In this POWERcast episode, we explore the journeys of female investors to talk about their funds, how they invest, how they make an impact. So let's start with this question, Elizabeth. What inspired you to become a venture capitalist?
Well, so I was very lucky early on, right when I was getting my MBA, to get completely sucked in, immersed, excited about our case competition, which is really kind of the capstone competition within the MBA course. And I happened to present to a group of executives. Our teams were all presenting to these judges who were volunteering their time. And on that panel of judges were executives from Procter & Gamble and also Deloitte. And one of the partners at Deloitte came up to me and he said, you really seem to enjoy this. You're good at it. Have you ever considered strategy consulting as a career? And I hadn't, and was recruited to join Deloitte. And that's really where I got exposure to the venture capital world, because we were doing front end M&A work for Johnson & Johnson. So we were on the other side of the table. We were looking for startups with really compelling technologies for Johnson & Johnson to either license or acquire. And it was at that time that I really got to know entrepreneurship, innovation, and that's where I fell in love with consumer. That's where I fell in love with venture capital. And after 2 years at Deloitte, decided to jump into venture capital. So it really started with innovation, right? The wonderful work and risks that entrepreneurs take to bring to life brand new disruptive technologies. And I knew that I wanted to be part of that really early work. And so 17 years ago, got into the field. At that time, I had no idea how competitive the venture capital field is, how small it really is. This part of alternatives is it's not a huge population of people in the world that do this kind of work, but it definitely is important work. And really at that time, I had no idea how insular and the lack of diversity really that existed within the field. And so I was blissfully unaware, really just, love the work. And now that, I've been part of the venture capital ecosystem for years, one of the things that I love to do is to look for ways to really help our community be more diverse and really understand some of the barriers to that happening.
I love it. So not only did you immerse yourself into this, quite, as you say, small ecosystem, but you're making an impact. So tell us a little bit about your company, H Ventures Partners.
Yeah, so H Venture Partners is 5 years old. I started the firm after working for two really wonderful firms, West Capital and Maywick. And there was part of small teams investing all over North America, first as a generalist and then as a consumer specialist. And H Venture Partners really came about through my desire to fund more female entrepreneurs. I saw a huge gap in the marketplace, and had been part of, a number of different meetings with a variety of VCs, and did see what the research shows, which is that female entrepreneurs do have a tougher time raising capital. And so I wanted to be a positive force, and candidly just saw the business opportunity. It was after trying to get several really high quality deals over the finish line, one being Daily Harvest, which is now over $1 billion valuation. I saw these incredible teams not getting the kind of traction that they really deserved. And so said, you know what, there's a big opportunity here. I'm going to focus on this. I'm going to focus on consumer, and try to see more female founders funded, and that's how we got started.
I love it. Let's dig a little deeper into the intersection between, venture capitalism and, again, public works, public purpose. And so government involvement in the VC market has become an important catalyst for entrepreneurial ecosystems of young and innovative firms. Why should VCs care about public purpose? And feel free to, speak to also that consumer aspect of it as well. Why should VCs care about public purpose?
Well, I think there are so many reasons that purpose is a really important area to consider when you're investing capital. What we've seen historically is that brands that have a really strong sense of purpose tend to outperform. And I'm thinking of brands like Patagonia, brands that are a force for good. Consumers really identify with that, and this has been a trend for a long time. It's an enduring trend that we've seen. But then the numbers play out when we look at stock performance. For companies who really do have a strong sense of purpose, high quality individuals want to work at those firms. Consumers want to buy their products, suppliers want to partner with them. And so there's value to that as an investor. And so we look at the outperformance of purpose-driven firms. Another way to answer, why should VCs be, focused on it? One, life is too short to work with, folks who don't have a great sense of purpose, but financial return for VCs, our main job is to produce the best adjusted return that we can for our investors. So we're professional investors, and optimizing return is something that we want to be focused on. People don't talk a whole lot about the risks, of investing in companies that don't have, solid governance, good leadership, good, sense of purpose. But there's an implicit risk, I think, in, companies that are either badly managed or managed by folks that aren't so so great. So that's something to consider. I think another way to think about the question, though, why should VCs be concerned about public purpose? To flip it around, why should the public be concerned about what VCs are investing in? And I think that is an important question that that leaders within our state Senate, our federal government should concern themselves with. And we are starting to see the SEC and some public pensions and others really start to ask some of these questions, because it does have a big impact. What VCs invest in or don't invest in has an impact on the public.
Share some more insights on that in terms of what they do invest in or what they don't invest in? Answer that question for us, just with maybe one or two examples.
Yeah, so ESG, environmental social governance factors, are factors that are related to purpose, having a good positive impact on the world. And that is something that I would say larger, sophisticated investors have started to focus on. But we're really at the first few innings of this. We're not seeing a ton of capital really move yet, but I think we will soon. An example could be climate impact. And so we have large investors like BlackRock that 3 years ago issued a statement that they're not going to be insuring companies in coastal areas because of climate change. You have a lot of investors, endowments, university endowments that are trying to divest from coal, from gasoline, from big greenhouse emissions. And so, that is one area, the environmental aspect. And then I would say, the second, letter that you have environmental, you have social governance, social being things like child labor. We look at this a lot because, there are certain ingredients in cosmetics, for instance, mica, that unfortunately, historically have used a lot of child labor around the world in order to mine that mica that goes into your eyeshadow, that goes into your blush and whatnot. And then governance, we've recently seen in Europe quite a bit, and now in California and other places, attention to the boards of companies. And do these boards have representation? Are there women? Are there people of color on the board? We know that there are plenty of women and people of color that are very experienced and qualified to sit on these boards, but do we see the same kind of representation, within that customer base or base of employees that we see on the board? So those are the three legs of the E, S, and G. But as a venture capital investor, I think one of the biggest opportunities that we still have within, call it the G, for instance, is more transparency around where capital flows. And so you brought up the really great point of where capital ultimately flows to founders, but there is a bit of a disconnect at the fund level. And here we are in Ohio, and Ohio actually has a law on the books that Ohio pensions must at least consider Ohio investment managers and minority investment managers. Interestingly, their definition of minority investment managers is, really strictly people of color, Hispanic, and it does not include women, although we know that, kind of the biggest gap is actually women and people of color and Hispanic. But that, those types of policies, I think do help. I think there's still a lot of work to be done though with average Joe investors, you and I, when we look at our retirement accounts, to see the kind of reporting that we really need to see in order to make informed decisions about where we want to put our money. Because we as retirees or folks that are saving for retirement are putting our money, unbeknownst to us, in an industry that is owned and controlled 99.9% of it by white men. And so that's really the first area where we need to see more transparency. We should see, okay, who owns this? Who is making the investment decisions? Do they have a diverse board or investment committee, as well as other things? I think the big one, probably the most important one, even before diversity, is, hey, what's the climate impact here?
Mm-hmm.
Is this a group that is looking at sustainable technologies with their underlying portfolio companies? Are we focused on the things that we really need to be focused on for long-term sustainability? So right now, you're not going to see greenhouse gas emissions reported in your Charles Schwab statement. You're not going to see, gender diversity reported in your UBS statement.
Mhm.
Should you? Probably.
I love it. Thank you for those in-depth examples that really help us understand, again, why we as a public should be concerned and research and looking into where our public dollars are going to support, again, these venture projects. So I want to go into that just a little bit deeper. More and more government access to cutting technologies, skills, and business models involve tapping into advances being made through private and commercial innovation. How can public policy foster conditions in which entrepreneurs can thrive, especially given, this movement towards products that are environmentally safe, and towards not having a negative impact on our social environments as well?
Well, I think the funds need to flow in a way that reflects the values of the public. I think one challenge that I'm sure folks in elected office have is, there's a good part of the public that just doesn't believe that climate change is real, or that we need to be concerned about gender or racial equity at all. So that is a challenge. But when you look to Europe, when you look to some of these other places, but I would say definitely Europe is the leader. We're actually seeing pretty amazing strides in terms of getting more women and people of color on boards, so getting more representation there. We're starting to see more capital allocated towards climate initiatives. So I think it really starts with policy, first and foremost. Do we have the public will to make the decisions as to where our resources need to be going? Number one. And then actually focusing on that transparency. I'm a fund manager. Reporting, any type of reporting, accounting, all of that, if you're gonna count, profits and losses, and you're also going to, account for greenhouse gas emissions, I will be honest, it's not necessarily automatic. Those are things that we have to work at and develop tools and systems and standardized terminology, standardized forms in order for companies and managers to be able to do that efficiently. But those things are happening. Those tools are definitely being used at larger companies, and we're starting to see some of it, trickle down to smaller. So we're on a path. Anyone that's a part of any of this is impatient to see it happen faster.
I love it. Your last response also got at this issue of diversity and equity, right? And so female VCs are twice as likely as their male counterparts to fund women-run businesses. What can VC firms, individual investors, and entrepreneurs do to dismantle the barriers female as well as people of color entrepreneurs face and meaningfully advance gender, racial, ethnic diversity and equality and equity in venture capital?
I think it starts at the top. You have to see leaders at the top that are really committed to doing this on all levels. And so I look at things like ownership of the firm, leadership of the firm, investment decision making, and then broadly diversity within the whole organization. So it's pretty difficult, I would say, to network into a group of female founders if you are not female. Although the intention can be there, and I've definitely seen, that's a great example, like Kirk Sims is head of the Texas Teachers Retirement System Emerging Manager Program. He's come to Women in Private Equity, a summit for, and he's the only guy that, but he funds female fund managers, and so makes the effort and shows up, because that is part of, he is actively looking to fund female managers. Those same VCs, if you want to invest in women, you got to show up in the places where those female founders are and are active. And I would say the same is true for funding founders of color. You have to actively reach out, network, make it a priority. But it really starts at the top, because if it's not part of the brand, if it's not part of the mission of the organization, it won't happen, right? Leaders can only focus on so many key initiatives at a time. I would argue 3 at a time. And so if it's not in your top 3, it's not in your top 3. It's not going to happen that year.
Thank you so much for that. So that top 3, I would love to get your insights on what those top 3 should be, as we think about what are the industry-wide organizational and interpersonal barriers to kind of gender, and let's just say this broad, all-encompassing diversity. When we think about those barriers, and you've mentioned some industry-wide, organizationally, what are those things that our companies, that our investors should be focused on to break down those barriers that may impact the diversity, both on an industry level and an organizational level?
I think recruiting is a big one. It honestly starts with, you got to follow the money. So I know that there are plenty of female founded, minority founded VC firms out there that this is either one of the reasons they exist, or just by virtue of being a woman or a person of color, it is something that they recognize and would like to see change. That in and of itself is a fundamental shift from the industry of yesteryear, where it was just so patently white male, sort of Stanford, Harvard, San Francisco based. I mean, it just had a reputation, and so you're seeing more conversation and more firms and just really great organizations and networks evolve. That's where it started. So those communities that support entrepreneurs, that are for us, by us, and have those allies that have joined and said, I love diversity, equity, inclusion. They're actually great companies here. We should make sure to send someone, or I'm going to go. I volunteer. I'm going to show up at that event and network and meet people and help. But the really big shifts come from the larger investors, and the ILPA, the International Limited Partner Association. That is the group that has really set the standards for how pension funds and sovereign wealth funds then invest in private equity funds, venture capital firms. And so when those investors at the top, when the state of Ohio, or the Ohio State University Endowment says, we're going to divest from greenhouse gas emissions, we're going to ask the question of some of these venture firms that we're interviewing to manage our endowment dollars, what's the ownership of your firm look like? Who is on your investment committee? Give us a breakdown of your diversity stats within your firm. Give us a breakdown of your diversity stats within the companies that you invest in. When you have to put pen to paper or fill out an Excel spreadsheet with this info, just being asked the question makes people wake up and realize that they're being measured by yet another set of standards, not just what are your returns, and what have your returns been for the last 10 years, but what are you doing in this space? So that's really what needs to happen, and it's starting to happen. The questions are being asked. Now, are the checks being written yet any differently? I've heard some stories, just anecdotes of firms not getting hired again. So typically, like an endowment will invest in, a fund 3, and then a fund 4, and then a fund 5. And wait a second, is this firm really representative of what we want to be investing in? They start asking the questions. Maybe they don't get the investment in fund 6 because the answers were not compelling enough. So I've heard of that happening a couple times. I think what really needs to happen, though, is greater investment in the fund 1s and the fund 2s of the firms that actually do meet the profile. So when you look at the new crop of venture capital investors out there, there are only a few public pensions, larger endowments that are truly investing in that new class of up and coming female and minority fund managers, where they're writing, $1 million or $5 million or $10 million check into a first time or a second time fund. Why is that important? Because you can keep asking the guys that have $1 billion or $10 billion under management the same questions, and they'll make some changes, but there's nothing fundamentally different at the top. And I think it takes longer for that to really change within an organization. And I haven't seen a ton of firms like navigate that well, where it's ownership, it's control, it's investment making decisions. The newer crop of emerging managers that are Latina and Black and female, right? Those firms are backing those companies. It's just that we're not seeing a whole lot yet. Even endowments and foundations are known to invest in emerging managers that are that more diverse set, but it's still typically their later stage funds, the funds that they've already built the firm over the last 10 years and done the really, really hard work. So I think there's still opportunity to write smaller checks in smaller emerging firms.
And you brought that full circle, again, noting that organizationally, it comes from the top. You have to have leadership that is on board and committed to the diversity of gender and minorities, right? And then you brought in that element of recruiting. You have to go out to where those businesses and companies are and ensure that they have a mission and a vision that's connected to the public purpose, right? And then, thirdly, that spark of hope that you have, that companies will continue to connect to that public purpose, that investors will ask those tough questions of the funding firms to say, okay, of the companies that you are working with, how diverse are they? What is their commitment to the issues and the values that are important to our community? As they look to work with firms to invest everything from pensions to, and I love how you brought in foundations, because again, as nonprofits, we look to foundations to provide this stability economically for our purposes and our missions that we care so deeply about, that can provide, again, those additional dollars when we need to do work in our community. So again, we want to ensure that those foundations are connecting dollars with the purposes that are ultimately being reflected in the work of the nonprofits. We want to make sure that there's a solid connection there. So thank you so much for that. Thank you for joining me today and sharing all of your wisdom and insights. Before we close, do you have any last tips to share with our rising women leaders?
Yeah, I would say that, the change is coming. It's obviously been a long time in the making. When I look at the groups that I'm a part of and their successes, other fund managers, female fund managers, Black fund managers, Latina fund managers, I'm really excited to see so many new firms that are being formed, investing in really, compelling companies that are out there doing the work. And as long as we see this cohort of great fund managers out there and raising capital, investing capital, I think we will see a more meaningful impact here in the next 10 and 20 years as those firms mature and are able to attract more capital. But what can each of us do today and every day to help this happen faster is just get the word out. Every time I talk to an executive woman about, did you know that 99% of all retirement dollars are managed by white men? They're shocked, they're concerned. They go and they talk to their wealth managers the next day, the next week, and start making changes because it's just something that's not well known. I think that there are so many other areas like Hollywood, sports, politics, where representation is obvious.
Mhm.
This is one industry, and unfortunately, we are still in a world where money and power are very closely linked, and and there's a lot of money in politics still, unfortunately, that has an impact. And so I think this is one industry where whether it's intentional, and intentionally a lack of transparency, or I think it's just natural because investment firms tend to be, less out there, right? They're not making a major motion picture. They're not competing in, in a televised event, a sports event. And so it's just not as obvious. And it's, something that just needs to be more out there, and I think that the more individuals take note and make their own investment decisions accordingly, we'll see faster and more positive change.
Wow. Elizabeth, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to our listeners for joining us on the POWERcast today. Until our next episode, let's continue to change lives and change the world through leadership.